Hello and welcome to our guide for Spoils of Pandaria, one of the final bosses in the Siege of Orgrimmar. The fight takes place in 4 different quadrants of a large room. Each quadrant is filled with a large number of crates of different sizes which your raid members can open. The crates contain mobs that your raid must kill. 2 of the quadrants are MOGU themed and the other 2 are MANTID themed. Let's look at the structure of the fight before going into details about the mechanics. At the start of the fight, 1 MOGU and 1 MANTID quadrants are accessible, and your raid will need to split up into 2 groups. Once enough mobs have been killed in each quadrant, there is a special resource bar on player screens showing how many more adds need to be killed. A lever can be used to unlock the gates leading to the remaining 2 quadrants, where your raid will need to once again open crates and defeat adds. Each MOGU quadrant is linked only to a MANTID quadrant, so the group that fought in the MOGU quadrant first will then fight in a MANTID quadrant next, and vice versa for the other group. When enough mobs have been killed in the final 2 quadrants, your raid can once again pull levers that this time mark the end of the fight. The entire fight is timed, your raid having 270 seconds to get through the first 2 quadrants and 300 seconds to get through the last 2. The timer is reset to 300 after the first 2 levers are pulled, so the amount of time does not get added up. Now let's look at the mobs, their abilities, and how to handle them. In each quadrant, there are 3 different crate sizes: lightweight, which are the smallest, stout, which are medium-sized, and massive, which are the largest. Each crate contains 1 mob out of a few different possibilities, except for the massive crates where the mobs are always basically the same. Let's look at the MOGU quadrant first. Lightweight MOGU crates can contain 1 of 3 mobs: animated stone MOGUs, burial urns, and Quillen Guardians. Animated stone MOGUs have 2 abilities. Hardened Flesh is an interruptible and dispellable 10-second dot that deals damage and progressively slows the target. Earthen Shard is an interruptible nuke that deals nature damage. Interrupt these adds as much as possible and kill them. Burial Urns are mobs that do not attack and do not have any abilities, but which summon several smaller adds called Sparks of Life. These adds deal pulsing damage in a 4-yard area around them and, when killed, deal high damage to all players within 8 yards. They do not need to be tanked. They have low health, so your ranged DPS players can kill them easily, just make sure not to be near them. Quillen Guardians only have a stacking bleed effect that they apply on their main target, called Carnivorous Bite. Stout MOGU crates can contain 1 of 2 mobs: Modified Anima Golems and MOGU Shadow Ritualists. Modified Anima Golems have 2 abilities. Matter Scramble places several beams of light at random locations in the quadrant and, a few seconds later, swaps the locations of players who are standing in the beams of light. If there are no players standing in a beam of light, the entire raid takes very high damage. Just make sure to have some players move into the beams of light as soon as they appear and you will be fine. The modified Anima Golems also cast Crimson Reconstitution, which places a void zone at the location of the golem, and this heals anyone standing in it, including the golem and other mobs. You should make sure to move any mobs out of these void zones, but you can stand in them if you want to receive some healing. MOGU Shadow Ritualists have 3 abilities. Torment is a dispellable dot that deals increasing shadow damage over time and which jumps to a nearby target when dispelled, but it has its damage reset to the base value every time it jumps. All instances of this dot disappear when the ritualist dies, so you should just keep dispelling the dot and healing its damage until the mob dies. Forbidden Magic is an interruptible channeled nuke that you just need to interrupt whenever it is cast, and MOGU Rune of Power is a void zone that increases the melee, ranged, and spell haste of anyone standing in it, enemy mobs included. Deal with it in the same way as with the Crimson Reconstitution void zones. Each massive MOGU crate contains 1 of 4 MOGU Elders. All 4 of them share a common ability, and then they each have an individual one, although the individual abilities differ only in terms of the school of magic to which their damage belongs. The shared ability is called Return to Stone. The MOGU Elder damages random raid members, knocks them back, and summons stone statues at their location. These adds don't do anything except walk around, but when they are alive, they increase the MOGU Elder's damage by 10%. The individual abilities all deal damage in an area around the MOGU Elder, something that you just need to heal through. For the stone statues, your ranged raid members should prioritize killing them, but other than this it does not require any special action. There is no fixed strategy for the MOGU quadrants, or for the MANTID quadrants as we will see later on. Simply deal with the abilities of the mobs as they spawn. You can open more than one crate at a time, and it is up to you to find the right balance between maximizing your raid's cleaving and multi-dotting DPS and not being overwhelmed by the ads. Now let's look at the MANTID quadrant. The lightweight MANTID crates contain one of three mobs: Srithic Bombardiers, Amber Encased Conchongs, and Korthic Warcallers. Srithic Bombardiers have two abilities. Gusting Bomb deals damage in a 5-yard area around a random raid member and leaves behind a void zone, and Throw Explosives deals damage in a 2-yard area around several random raid members. You can't really see the gusting bombs in the video, but in any case, you should avoid them and you should be slightly spread out. Amber Encased Conchongs cast a gas cloud that deals some fire damage to players who come in contact with it. You should simply avoid these clouds. Korthic Warcallers have a self-buff that they sometimes cast, which increases their damage and reduces their movement speed, and causes their melee attacks to apply an armor-reducing debuff. It seems you are meant to kite them when they have this buff, but you will probably just kill them quickly enough that it won't matter. Stout MANTID crates contain one of two mobs: Zarthic Amber Priests and Sethic Wind Wielders. Zarthic Amber Priests have two abilities. MANTID Swarm summons a number of small adds to the aid of the Amber Priest, and Residue is a dispellable buff that the Amber Priest places on another mob. It heals that mob and other mobs around it. Dispel Residue and kill the small adds. Sethic Wind Wielders have two abilities. They summon moving tornadoes called Windstorms, which deal damage in an area. They also cast Rage of the Empress, a buff that is applied on all nearby allies, increasing their damage done by 50%, but this can be dispelled. Just avoid the windstorms and dispel Rage of the Empress. Finally, the massive crates contain MANTID Commanders. Despite having different names, these mobs are all identical. They deal damage to the entire raid while they are alive, and they regularly place a debuff called Set to Blow on a random raid member. This is a 15-second debuff with 5 charges that grants the player an extra action button for its duration. While active, the debuff does nothing, but when it expires, it deals a high amount of damage to the player for each stack of the debuff. Using the extra action button, the player can drop these stacks, leaving them on the floor in the form of bombs. These bombs become armed a few seconds after being placed, and they detonate if anyone is within 9 yards of them. And they all detonate anyway 30 seconds after being placed. Basically, whoever is affected by Set to Blow needs to go to an empty area of the quadrant and place all their bombs there before the 15-second debuff expires. In terms of strategy, there is not much to be said for the MANTID quadrants either, except that you need to carefully handle all the abilities thrown at you in the way we have described. In addition to all of this, there exists another type of crates called Crates of Pandarean Relics. These are peppered around throughout the 4 quadrants. Each one contains one of 3 hostile Pandarean NPCs which, when killed, automatically grant a buff to all raid members of a certain role. The Ancient Brewmaster Spirits buff your tanks when they die, causing them to automatically deal damage in a 4-yard area when they attack. The Brewmaster Spirits have a keg toss mechanic, essentially a shadow crash, and they also channel a frontal breath attack for 6 seconds while spinning around. Spread out and avoid the keg toss, and don't be in front of him when he casts his breath attack. The Wise Mistweaver Spirits buff your healers when they die, causing their heals to have a chance to shoot a healing wave in front of them. The Mistweaver Spirits have an ability called Gusting Crane Kick. This pulls all players to the Mistweaver, who then deals damage in a 10-yard area for 4 seconds. They also have a passive ability called Eminence that causes them to heal themselves for 150% of the damage they do. Move away after being pulled in by Gusting Crane Kick. The Nameless Windwalker Spirits buff your DPS when they die, giving their attacks a chance to deal some extra fire damage. The Windwalker's only ability is called Path of Blossoms. They charge a random raid member and leave a trail of fiery blossoms behind them, which explode and deal damage in a 3-yard radius if they're touched. You should open the Pandarean crates whenever you can, since the buffs offered by these mobs are quite useful. Finally, there are a few lift hooks around the room, which can be used by players to move from one quadrant to another. While moving an entire group is not feasible, since moving takes a while and only one player can use a hook at a time, this can be used to rebalance your group slightly if you find that it is needed. For a more detailed and constantly updated written version of this guide, go to the link in the description. Thank you for watching.